Hi, I'm Sherilyn Eiffel, President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and welcome to a special screening of the trials of Constance Baker Motley. When we think about civil rights pioneers, American heroes, those who pushed this country to live up to its highest ideals, Constance Baker Motley should always be top of mind. Many know of her incredible legacy as the first Black woman to ever become a federal judge, but long before her appointment to the bench, she was a young lawyer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Venturing into the deepest parts of the South, often putting her own life at risk, Constance Baker Motley led LDF's education docket. She played a vital role on the team that litigated Brown versus Board of Education, but it was her successful challenges to segregated education at Southern state universities that led her to becoming the first Black woman to argue before the United States Supreme Court, and that transformed public universities in Southern states, opening access to education at those institutions for Black students. Often the only Black woman in the courtroom, Constance Baker Motley's career is a testament to her courage, her brilliance, her passion, and her excellence. Not only a trailblazing attorney, but a devoted wife and mother, her legacy stands as the full embodiment of Black women lead. But we'll hand it over to someone who knew Constance Baker Motley in a way none of us ever could. Attorney and business leader, her son, Joel Motley.
Thank you for gathering today to see the film about my mother, The Trials of Constance Baker Motley. There is no organization nearer and dearer to my heart and to that of our family than LDF. Some of you may be familiar with Gilbert King's book, which won a Pulitzer Prize in 2013. The title is Devil in the Grove, Thurgood Marshall and the Groveland Boys, and the Dawning of a New America. That book is about 4 Black boys falsely accused of raping a white woman, very much like the Scottsboro Boys 10 years earlier. This story takes place in 1948 in Florida. And in the beginning of that book, Gilbert King mentions 2 moments about my mother. She was then, in 1948, 2 years out of Columbia Law School. She had been a clerk in law school for Thurgood Marshall, and then she went there straight after graduation. And at the very beginning of the book, Thurgood is on the phone with Walter White, who was then the head of the NAACP, and Thurgood's complaining about the lack of resources for the legal department. There was no LDF in those days. There were just lawyers at the NAACP. And he said he didn't have enough resources for the lawyers. In fact, he had to share a phone with another lawyer. And that lawyer was my mother. And then a little further on in the beginning of the story, Gilbert King recounts my mother calling up the sheriff who had arrested the 4 boys and telling him that she was representing them and demanding to know where they were and what condition they were in. And I'm sure we can all be certain that that was the first time that a white sheriff in the South received a phone call from a Black woman lawyer demanding to know where some defendants were and how they were being treated. So that really was the dawning of a new America. So today, the struggle goes on. Thank you to the staff of LDF for carrying the struggle on. Some of the issues are new, many are not. But thank you for carrying it forward with the intensity and dedication that you do.
I'd like to say preliminarily that I feel that the President's nomination of me as a candidate for the federal bench has moved me from politics, and I therefore will not answer any political questions. I will not make any political comments, and I will not make any political predictions. So I think that ought to abbreviate the conference somewhat.
Mr. Motley, you've long been active in the civil rights movement in this country. Does your appointment have any meaning to the civil rights movement, would you say?
Well, I think that the people with whom I've worked in the civil rights movement over the last 20 years are pleased to hear of the President's appointment. I think it gives great status to civil rights lawyers who some years ago were not the most popular people in the country. And the cases which I handled in the South, of course, were never popular in the communities in which we brought those cases. And I think for Negro Americans all over the country, of course, it's another indication that America is about to make good on its promise of equal opportunity for all Americans. And I suppose that's the greatest significance of my appointment.
You think you have any problem getting through the Senate, Mr. Motley?
Rise in life. How fast it happened.
I don't know that it's been very fast. It seems to be a long time since I was a little girl.
Mrs. Motley, you have been described as being soft-spoken and quiet, but very, very tough. Would you say that's an accurate description?
Well, I read that in the New York Times this morning, and I'm sure they're always accurate.
This is an interview with Judge Constance Baker Motley on November 12th, 1977.
One of the results of segregation, as was argued in the Brown case, as you know, was that when the state set aside black children in separate schools, this affected the ability of black children to learn, because then they saw themselves as inferior people. And if you feel that you're inferior and can't learn, then of course that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it feeds on itself. And sure enough, you don't learn. So that one of the effects of segregation was to make blacks feel inferior, because the reality for them was that they were inferior in the society. The white people were the privileged people, and they were underprivileged people. They could see, every black child could see, that blacks had less than whites, that blacks were treated differently from whites, and therefore black children grew up feeling that they were, in fact, inferior people. And that attitude manifested itself in many of our efforts to get blacks to participate in these cases. They were fearful. They knew that the white community was powerful. They felt there was no hope.
The charge has been made, and made by some fairly moderate people, gradualists you might call them, that the NAACP, whose general counsel you are, is moving too far, too fast. That following the decision of the Supreme Court, you would have been well advised to let things move along gradually for a while, that you can't overthrow the prejudices of 300 years overnight.
You can't, or maybe you can't, override prejudice overnight. But the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, 90-odd years ago. I believe in gradualism. I also believe that 90-odd years is pretty gradual.
We got Autry and Lucy admitted to the University of Alabama, and the judge
You mean the officials at the university accepted her registration?
No. Well, they had to. There was Judge Grooms,
yes,
the federal judge there, awarded her admission. They admitted her, and then they expelled her or put her out on the ground that there was this riot. Yes, we filed a suit charging them with, improperly putting her out, conspiring with the mob to put her out, and so forth. And then they used that as an excuse to expel her again. One of the problems was that where the school was located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, there was a really vicious, lawless group there. There had been bombings repeatedly of Arthur Shore's home. I guess his home must have been bombed 15 times. I remember the night we stayed there when the Arthur and Lucy case was on. I stayed awake the whole night. We had a group of men outside with the garage door open and their guns trained toward the road, so that if anybody came up that road and slowed down, they were going to be shot, because those would be the guys getting out to bomb the house.
It was still a battle, and it was still a fight, and it was also, you have to admit this too, it was also dangerous because nobody ever knew what was going to happen when we walked out of those courtrooms, or when she walked into some place in Mississippi where everybody hated what she stood for. But you never, ever got the sense that she was afraid, or any of those lawyers were afraid, when fear would have been totally justifiable because there was a good reason for it.
In connection with the University of Georgia case, we had to go to Athens, Georgia, where the university was actually located, to go over the records again, to compare the applications of Whites with the applications of Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes. And so we went through thousands of records, and we went there every day, I think for a couple of weeks. I stayed in Atlanta, and there was no place for us to stay in Athens, and Donald Howell had to get back to his office each day.
He was your local
Yes.
man.
And Vernon Jordan was my assistant. Vernon actually took over for Donald, because Donald decided after a few days he couldn't go down there every day, because it was like 100 miles from Atlanta. It took us 2 hours to drive down, 2 hours to drive back. We'd leave at 6 o'clock in the morning.
You could not stay in Athens.
That's right. So we left at 6 o'clock in the morning, and Vernon would drive.
It was fascinating to me to see this accomplished lawyer get in the car. She sat in the front seat with me. She would say good morning, and she'd be very pleasant. But as soon as she got in the car, she took her stuff out. And you never been to this kind of barber who strapped his razor on that to get it sharp. Well, as I'm driving, I'm watching her hit that razor scrap, getting ready for the direct examination, the cross-examination, anticipating in her own mind loopholes in our case, loopholes in the state's case. It was quite something to see. And then once you got in the courtroom, I'm sitting there at the table with she and Hollowell and Ward, and you see the value of that preparation.
At that time, Joel, her son, was about 8. And she said, I would like to get home to my husband and son up in New York, but I have a job to do. We have a job to do. And I almost wanted to cry. I mean, here was Attorney Motley recognizing me as a person, you know, and also getting outside of that legalistic manner that she had, which was so cool and competent, but this was so warm and embracing. And I just had I felt so embarrassed that I was angry, that here she was, you know, having even a more difficult thing, because this was a son and a husband whom she hadn't seen.
I'm not for integration, I'm for segregation, and I will be until I die.
We were going to have the same kind of trouble we had with the Arthur and Lucy case in Alabama. And of course, sure enough, we did. And, you know, the governor made this deal with the Kennedys that he would step aside and let James Meredith in, but he double-crossed them, as a result of which several people were killed that night on the University of Mississippi campus.
This man has just died.
Did he die?
Yes.
Which one, state police?
That's state police.
Yeah. Well, you see, we got to get order up there, and that's what we thought we were going to have.
President, please, why don't you, can't you give an order up there to remove Mayor?
How can I remove him, Governor, when there's a riot in the street, and he may step out of that building and something happen to him? I can't remove him under those conditions. Let's get order up there, then we can do something about Meredith.
We can surround it with plenty of officials.
Well, we've got to get somebody up there now to get order and stop the firing and the shooting. Then you and I will talk on the phone about Meredith.
He suffered, I guess, more than anybody else. Personally, I don't know that to be a fact, but from my own experience and the people we dealt with, like Charlene Hunton, Hamilton Holmes, Vivian Malone, and others, I was with Meredith, I guess, probably longer than I was with any of the others. Mississippi was the worst state, and the fear of violence was greater there probably than any other place.
Do you feel that you will be admitted to Ole Miss?
Well, I don't have any particular feeling in this matter. I think this is, I've gone my limit, my route. I think now this is responsibility of Merrick.
Written all these letters back and forth. He kept sending us copies, you know, and they kept using one evasive tactic after another, telling, well, submit this or submit that. Finally, we decided to bring the suit, and we got it ready. I guess it was 61, when the Freedom Riders arrived in Jackson. I remember going into court in Jackson. I had been there before Judge Mize, and Judge Mize just shook his head and said, why'd you have to come now?
See, I was never involved in the case. I came back to Mississippi to launch a war against white supremacy for the purpose of destroying white supremacy. A school lawsuit. It was a tactical thing that developed later. Like the invasion anomaly, it was a tactical decision to try to defeat Hitler. It was not the goal. It was not to invade Normandy.
Mr. Meredith wrote this statement in his own hand, and we have had it mimeographed so that you can have an exact copy of it. If he had arrived here on time, he would make this statement himself. He calls this my position. In this time of crisis, I feel it appropriate for me to clarify my position as to my intention, my objectives, my hopes, and my desires.
Your mother had an ego that showed probably as big as any female ever been known in America. And having such an ego, she had the good sense not to ever offend mine. And that might not have been important in her situation, but without that reality, we would have never had a situation.
I watched most of the Meredith episode at Iowa State University, which meant that every night I watched the Huntley-Brinkley Report in my dorm, the den of my dorm, and watching what was happening on that campus. And guys would come up to me and say, Harvey, are you crazy? I got this feeling that it's not going to happen to me. Now, it might have been a little bit of naivete on my part, but I actually thought that it never would happen. That there is something about South Carolina that's different than Mississippi.
I don't expect too much resistance of any kind. I'm sure that we will get along fine. Now, if you do detect a feeling of resentment, perhaps, what do you plan to do about it? Well, let's say that I don't expect any. At the moment, I haven't made any decisions as to what I will do about it. I really don't expect any trouble.
I was a kid. You know, I was 18 years old at the time, 19 years old at the time. And I wasn't sure what these court cases were about. But Matthew Perry, who was the South Carolina affiliate of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, was telling me prior to getting there that they were bringing in the lawyer who had fought the case for James Meredith and for all the other, in fact, all the desegregation cases at the college level were going through this woman by the name of Constance Baker Motley. Well, for me, the curious thing was, in fact, the name, Constance Baker Motley. That made her sound important before I had ever laid eyes on her.
Let me say this to you. I had one merchant to call me, and he said, I want you to know that I've talked to my national office today, and they want me to tell you that we don't need nigger business.
Medgar Evers.
Yes, Medgar Evers was the NAACP secretary for the state of Mississippi.
Yes.
And Medgar would always meet me at the airport, and he was the one who first notified us of James Meredith's application to the University of Mississippi.
These are stories that help to support the White Citizens Council, the council that is dedicated to keeping you and I second-class citizens.
The street was peculiar in the sense that it was unpaved, kind of fork in the road, which consisted of a bunch of high bushes, really. And this was the bush behind which the man stood that killed Medgar.
You know, that's what happened in wars. People die. Medgar's death, I can understand having a powerful impact on her. It had a powerful impact on me, and usually it doesn't. Because that's what soldiers do. They kill enemies. That's what enemies do. They kill soldiers.
As you feel the pains of dogs here in Greenwood, we'll feel them in Jackson. And if we feel them in Jackson, you feel them here. And when we get this unity, ladies and gentlemen, nothing can stop us. We're going to win this fight for freedom. Thank you very much. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
I was one of those fortunate enough to have a ticket to sit on a platform. And I took my son with me. He was only about, I don't know, 10 or 12 around. So it was a tremendous success. And as Martin Luther King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech, you had the feeling that that was something which we would never hear again.
Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
I am very pleased about the fact that my elevation to the state Senate gives me an opportunity not only to fight for the rights of Negroes, for which I've been fighting for the last 18 years, but to fight for all of the people of my city and state.
For some non-Southern views on this dispute, we go down to the floor where Bob Clark will interview Constance Baker Motley, a delegate from the state of New York.
Mrs. Motley, of course, is the former chief legal counsel for the NAACP, now a member of the New York State delegation. Mrs. Motley, how do you feel about the Mississippi Compromise that was worked out here today?
Well, I thought it was a good compromise. I understand now that the Mississippi Freedom Party has rejected the compromise, and I'm running now to meet with our New York State delegation to see exactly what the Freedom Party wants. But I'd like to say this, that I'm with them 100%. I think they ought to be seated. They represent certainly 50% of the population of Mississippi. That is the Negro population. It's not allowed to vote in Mississippi, and I think they ought to be seated somehow in this delegation.
Mrs. Motley, as borough president, you are among the highest paid and busiest women in American public life. How do you manage to run a home, be a wife, and be responsible for 1.7 million citizens in Manhattan?
Well, I think it's simply a question of organization. I think that a home ought to be organized just like a business. And for a professional woman, certainly this is a must. And with the cooperation of husband and children, I think you can manage.
Do you, Constance Baker Motley, solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that you will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of President of the Borough of Manhattan of the City of New York according to the best of your ability?
I do.
So you don't see your family too much?
No, I don't, and that's one of the sacrifices that one has to make for the privilege of serving in a public office. I don't think you can, in effect, have your cake and eat it too. There are some sacrifices which must be made, and that is one.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mrs. Borough President, you've been rumored and suggested and practically named to a federal judgeship. If such a position was offered, would you accept it?
Maybe we better, can we cut this?
In January 1966, I was just called and told to come
To the White House.
To the White House. The president said to me when I got in, well, we're going to announce your appointment to the bench today, and all the newspaper people are here. They'll be taking pictures, and I'm going to let them in a few minutes. I said, today? And he said, yes. Did you know? I said, no. He said, well, we don't have to do it today. I said, oh, no, it's all right. We'll do it today. Nobody told me. He liked these surprises, you know, and this was a well-guarded secret. Even I didn't know it was going to be announced. He had the newspaper people come in. They took all these pictures and blah, blah, blah. And then when they left, he picked up the telephone and he said to his secretary, get me Bobby Kennedy on the telephone.
I'll do it then sometime during the afternoon if that's agreeable. You work out whenever you can get the hearing set, and then you let her know, will you?
I've written you a personal letter today, which you go over there, but there's some material that I thought you might be interested in.
Good. I'd like to see you anytime you're free. You come down and let's have a visit. Would you like to say a word to her now? Do you have a time?
Sure. That'd be
Judge Motley, come over here and just come here and you can take it right here. Take it here at the desk.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Hello, Mr. Senator.
Oh, yeah, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
No, I'm very pleased for you.
Yes. And I guess we'll get together on the confirmation soon.
Yes, that'll be fine. Well, there won't be any difficulty. So congratulations to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Nice to talk to you.
Yes, bye.
What would you like to see accomplished in New York City with respect to civil rights?
Well, I don't know whether it's proper to say civil rights, but I think our major problem here is the desegregation of the ghetto. I read in the Times this morning that the president has put in the budget an item for $12 million, which was what we were hoping for demonstration projects in urban centers, so that cities might demonstrate how the inner city might be reclaimed and the slums and ghettos of this country wiped out. I plan to write a letter today to the mayor urging him to immediately make our application, because we have a preliminary plan, as you know, for the reclamation of Harlem. And I certainly hope that we can, in New York, secure the first federal demonstration grant of how to do away with ghettos, because I think there is an inherent incompatibility between the existence of ghettos and the achievement of equal rights for Negroes in the North. Negroes in the North will never have their rights as long as they are ghettoized.
Robert Swain, petitioner versus Alabama. Senator Motley.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. Petitioner, in this case, is a Negro male about 20 years of age, and he asks this court to review the judgment of the Supreme Court of Alabama, which affirmed his conviction and sentenced to death on a charge of rape. The petitioner was convicted of raping a 17-year-old white girl and was sentenced to death by a petty jury sitting in Talladega County, Alabama. No Negro has ever served on a petty jury in Talladega County because they are always struck from the trial jury venire by the state's attorney.
Amen.
Amen.